The story begins at the estate of Count Flor, where he informs his daughter, Sylvia, that she must marry. To his astonishment, Sylvia agrees immediately, shocking both her parents, who had anticipated a refusal. They find it unbelievable that their languid daughter, who considered even breathing a chore, would willingly accept a proposal from Duke Belelffort. Sylvia reflects on her past behavior, mostly spent in bed, having missed her debutante ball and sleeping 16 hours a day. Despite this, she smiles reassuringly at her fretting father, insisting she will marry the Duke. Her parents are overcome with emotion, tearfully celebrating her decision while Sylvia calmly sips her tea. Observing their reaction, Sylvia Flor, the only daughter of the Flor family, recalls growing up pampered beyond measure, all to ensure her happiness. However, due to her frail constitution, she remained remarkably indifferent to material possessions, caring only for the finest beds and the avoidance of unnecessary exertion, such as debutante balls or regular meals. Her parents harbored deep anxieties about her future, knowing they couldn't care for her forever. To secure her well-being, they were determined to find her the perfect husband before they passed away. However, after years of searching, they had almost given up hope until the king suggested Duke Belelffort. The count had merely mentioned it in passing, never expecting Sylvia to accept so readily. Now, overjoyed, they felt they could finally die in peace. Meanwhile, Sylvia had her own ulterior motives. She knew that Duke Belelffort's territory was plagued by demons, making it the perfect place to meet her demise. In truth, Sylvia was not merely a languid noblewoman. She was someone named Alisa, who had been waiting for an opportunity to die, unable to end her own life. On her wedding day in Duke Belelffort's territory, the knights and guards celebrated boisterously, singing songs about Randall Belelffort's marriage. An embarrassed and frustrated Randall demanded they stop, but they insisted their congratulations were genuine. They even joked that he should control his temper before meeting his bride, lest his scowling frighten her away. Randall inwardly grumbled, recalling that these were the same men who had opposed his marriage just days prior. In a flashback, at the Elbereth Palace, the king subtly pressured Randall into marriage, suggesting Sylvia Flor as a suitable candidate. While phrased as a suggestion, Randall recognized it as a command, designed to prevent him from consolidating power through marriage. He would have preferred to refuse, but his territory bordered the demon-infested Calvitia, and they relied on the king for grain. Refusal could mean hardship for his people. Recognizing the futility of provoking the king, he knelt and obediently accepted the arrangement. Randall knew his knights were attempting to lighten his mood, despite knowing he was forced into this marriage. Annoyed, he warned them of extra training at dawn upon his return, eliciting groans of dismay. He then turned to Austin, the duchy's mage, who had completed the magic circle for his journey to the capital. After a moment of hesitation, Randall acknowledged his efforts and stepped into the glowing circle. As he prepared to depart, he contemplated the uncertain future with his new wife. While hoping for an amicable relationship, he remained wary. There was no guarantee the Flor family wasn't secretly working for the king. With that thought, he entered the teleportation circle, dreading the possibility that he might have to kill his own wife. In the Elbereth wedding hall, Sylvia's parents bid her a tearful farewell. The count tearfully told her to return if the duke mistreated her, while the countess encouraged her to flip the table if necessary, despite her lack of arm strength. Sylvia smiled reassuringly and entered the hall. Lost in thought as she walked, Sylvia considered the unfortunate possibility of a long life, a fate she'd never desired. Stopping before Randall, she composed herself and introduced herself with practiced grace. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Duke Belelffort. My name is Sylvia Flor Belelffort." Sylvia, or rather Alisa as she was truly known, revealed her hidden truth. This was her 100th life. She had been reborn countless times before. In her first life, Alisa had been a powerful archmage, a beacon of hope in the war against the demons. Loved and praised for her strength, she dedicated herself to protecting humanity, whatever the cost. Driven to eradicate the demons permanently, she delved into the study of demonic power, successfully opening a portal to the demon realm. Thrilled by her success, she presented her discovery to her colleagues. But instead of celebrating her achievement, they betrayed her, fearing her growing power, and cast her into the very realm she had opened. Trapped, Alisa struggled to understand why she had been forsaken. Alone in the demon realm, she fought endlessly, surviving for years against the onslaught of countless demons. Finally, she ascended to the pinnacle of power, slaying the demon king, Basis, and taking his place. But by then, she was no longer human, consumed by rage and resentment. Alisa turned her wrath upon the human world, attacking the very people she had once sworn to protect. With Alisa as the demon queen, humanity stood no chance against her overwhelming power. Just as the extinction of humanity seemed inevitable, a warrior named Cleon emerged. Imbuing his sword with magic, he finally defeated Alisa, ending her reign. In her final moments, filled with fury and bitterness, Alisa cursed humanity with her dying breath. However, instead of finding eternal rest, she awoke once more alive. Confused, she wondered why she still breathed after being slain. A divine voice echoed, condemning her use of forbidden dark magic and the countless lives she had taken. As punishment, she was cursed to die and be reborn 99 times. Trapped in an endless cycle of reincarnation, Alisa desperately tried to end her own life countless times, but the curse prevented her from taking her own hand. Over the course of 99 lifetimes, she slowly broke. Even after her punishment was complete, she was granted one final life. But the divine voice warned her that if she attempted to discard this life, she would suffer the same punishment again. She was being watched. As the wedding ceremony progressed, Sylvia became acutely aware that she could not die and had no choice but to accept her new fate. Randall, on the other hand, felt a strange sensation upon seeing Sylvia for the first time. He couldn't understand why his heart stirred at the sight of her. He had never met Miss Flora before, so why this feeling? When Sylvia suggested they proceed inside, he absently took her delicate hand and walked with her, though he had no intention of letting down his guard. He couldn't help but think she looked far too frail. He resolved to at least ensure she was well fed. Sylvia glanced at Randall, noting the kindness in his eyes. As long as she fulfilled her duties as his wife, she anticipated no trouble between them. The priest began the ceremony, declaring the union of Duke Randall Belelffort and Miss Sylvia Floret. The two exchanged rings, and the priest pronounced them husband and wife. Then came the final part. "You may seal your marriage with a kiss," the priest announced. Randall hesitated. She was 3 years younger than him, and while he personally didn't mind, he knew others would make a fuss if he actually kissed her in public. More importantly, Sylvia might be embarrassed. Thinking quickly, he lifted the bouquet between them, intending to only feign a kiss. But then a whisper reached his ears. "Could you open your mouth?" Startled, Randall froze. But before he could react, Sylvia closed the distance, and just like that, their first kiss became a reality. Sylvia was determined to maintain the facade of a happy marriage, knowing the gods were watching her every move. As the wedding feast began, the hall buzzed with excitement. Guests watched Sylvia and Randall dance, whispering amongst themselves. Some marveled at her grace, wondering if she was even human, while others remarked that those who spread rumors about her would now be eating their words. Meanwhile, Randall himself attracted the attention of many admiring noble women. As they danced, Sylvia found the whole affair exhausting and wished they could just skip ahead to the consummation. Randall, on the other hand, was surprised by how mature she seemed for a 22-year-old, finding it slightly unsettling. He also struggled with how to address her. Sensing his hesitation, Sylvia simply told him, "You can call me Sylvia." This momentarily surprised him. He was further taken aback when Sylvia playfully suggested that he could call her darling, babe, or sweetheart. He realized she had easily read his mind. After a brief pause, he asked her to call him Randall, expressing his hope that they could treat each other as equals, without unnecessary formalities. Hearing this, Sylvia laughed and commented that he was a good man, leaving Randall to wonder if that were truly the case. Just then, a maid approached Sylvia, informing her that she needed to change. Sylvia turned to Randall, excusing herself, and he readily agreed. As she departed, Randall's gaze fell upon Count and Countess Floret, Sylvia's parents. Randall approached them, offering a respectful greeting and assuring them that he would do his best to make Sylvia happy. He even invited them to share any concerns they might have about him. The Count and Countess were deeply touched by his sincerity. They gratefully entrusted their daughter to him. However, before they departed, Randall had one pressing question. Had Lady Floret truly never stepped foot outside the family estate in her 22 years of life? The next morning, everything was prepared for Sylvia's departure with Randall. Randall recalled his conversation with Count Floret the previous night. The Count had hesitantly revealed the truth. Sylvia rarely even left her bed, let alone the estate. She possessed an innate lethargy, sometimes remaining asleep for days on end. Her longest unbroken slumber had lasted 3 days. The revelation shocked Randall. He couldn't believe such a thing was possible for a human. Determined to improve her health, he resolved to ensure she took at least one walk each day. At that moment, Austin approached Randall, informing him that the return teleportation circle was ready. Randall nodded in acknowledgement, then turned to Sylvia, extending his hand with a slight blush. Sylvia offered a shy smile, a reaction Randall found endearing. They prepared to step into the magical portal. Sylvia silently contemplated her situation. She felt guilty for taking advantage of a kind man like Randall, but at least he was a good person. That way, after she was gone, he would be able to remarry and find happiness again. Sylvia blinked, realizing how far from home she already was. She missed her parents, the Count and Countess. She was exhausted and longed to simply go to bed. However, she reminded herself that tonight was their wedding night, and she needed to make an effort. Meanwhile, the knights accompanying them suddenly shivered, sensing something odd. One thought he heard something, while another dismissed it as his imagination. Then they noticed Austin looking unwell. When questioned, he scoffed, blaming it on the unstable teleportation spell they had used. The knights teased him, suggesting he should have cast a proper one, but Austin retorted that his magic had been depleted earlier that day. He even joked that unless they were willing to pay him over time, there would be no high-quality portals. They continued on, one night nostalgically mentioning how he used to wander this area as a child. However, he quickly admitted that he was actually eager to get home, as he was utterly exhausted. Suddenly, an eerie feeling permeated the air. The group felt as though something was following them. Sensing danger, Randall barked. Austin, erect a barrier around the woods. Austin swiftly obeyed. Yes, my lord. Just then, the air filled with a sudden roar and a flurry of rustling. Randall quickly shut Sylvia's carriage door, warning her not to open the window or make sound. A monstrous shriek echoed as a terrifying creature materialized before them. Randall instantly commanded his knights to draw their swords and protect the carriage. A fierce battle ensued as a swarm of pyrobats surrounded them. The knights were taken aback, for these creatures had never been seen in this forest before. Amidst the chaos, they struggled to hold their ground. Dismayed by the sheer number of monsters, they fought bitterly, finally managing to vanquish them all. Randall glanced towards Sylvia's carriage, worried she might be frightened after witnessing such an attack. Inside, her maids shivered in fear, but Sylvia remained remarkably composed. Meanwhile, Geoffrey, one of Randall's knights, gasped, realizing their lord had personally slain more than half the monsters. Turning, he suddenly noticed 2 children nearby. They seemed lost, discussing which way to go. A deep sense of unease washed over Geoffrey. Why would there be children in a place like this? Before he could act, the children gasped. Seeing the startled children frozen in fear, Geoffrey urgently called out for them to run to safety. However, noticing their inability to move, he realized he needed to protect them. Before he could react, a monster suddenly attacked him from behind. The impact sent him crashing into Sylvia's carriage. He collapsed, bleeding, and Randall rushed towards him with concern. At that very moment, Sylvia opened the carriage door. A monster, spotting her, charged in her direction. Instead of panicking, she remained calm, closing her eyes for a brief moment before opening them with newfound resolve. She used magic to mesmerize one of the monsters, compelling it to attack the creature advancing on her and Geoffrey. Geoffrey, stunned by the sight, struggled to comprehend what had just transpired. Before he could react further, Sylvia cast a spell on him, causing him to feel drowsy and eventually lose consciousness. Overcome with concern, Randall immediately called out to Sylvia, asking if she was all right, if she was hurt. Sylvia reassured him that she was fine, but expressed worry for Geoffrey. Randall then frantically tried to rouse Geoffrey, ordering Austin to help staunch the bleeding. The other knights quickly responded, turning Geoffrey over to examine the wound, Randall trembling with worry. Noticing his distress, Sylvia gently took his hand, offering a reassuring smile. She told him not to fret, assuring him Jeffrey would live. She then urged everyone to return to the castle at once. Back home, Jeffrey awoke with a sigh of relief, admitting he truly thought he was going to die. A knight reminded him to thank Austin, who, exhausted, had used teleportation magic to save him. Jeffrey agreed, then turned to Sylvia, apologizing for such an unpleasant incident on her first day. Sylvia reassured him there was no need to apologize, expressing her relief that he was safe. Jeffrey thanked her for her kindness. Meanwhile, Sylvia reflected on the situation. She was relieved her magic had worked and that Jeffrey seemed to have no memory of what had occurred. She never imagined she would use that magic so abruptly, but it had been purely instinctual. When a monster attacked, she had briefly felt that even if she died on the spot, it wouldn't matter. However, she knew she couldn't die in front of those children. Randall then informed Jeffrey that he would be placed on probation for a month and receive a pay cut. Jeffrey accepted the order and punishment without protest. Sylvia, meanwhile, replayed the moment Randall had cried out her name in his mind. For a man of such noble character as Randall, to witness someone being torn apart by monsters must have been utterly horrifying. However, she consoled herself with the thought that there would be plenty of opportunities for death in the future. She just had to wait for the next one. More importantly, she was relieved that Austin had been so far away. If he had been any closer, he might have noticed her using magic. She reminded herself to be more careful. She was supposed to be an ordinary person now, and for someone like her, to be wielding magic was preposterous. Just then, a maid approached them, informing them that everyone was waiting and asking if they would return now. Both Sylvia and Randall seemed surprised, and then they set off. Upon their arrival, Walcott, the butler, and Thelma, the head maid, stepped forward to greet Sylvia. The servants bowed in unison, offering her a warm welcome. Randall, flustered and a little embarrassed, pointed out that they were still in the infirmary and questioned whether the welcome couldn't wait until they reached the main hall. However, the butler firmly stated that waiting was impossible, as the incident with the injured knight had already delayed their plans. The head maid eagerly added that they were anxious to greet their lord and lady. Randall, with a touch of awkwardness, admitted that his servants had only one flaw: excessive enthusiasm. Sylvia, maintaining her composure, gracefully thanked everyone and introduced herself as Sylvia Flor Belelffort, asking them to look after her in the future. The head maid warmly assured her they would and offered to show her around. Following the head maid through the grand estate, Sylvia was shown a room and told that this would be her chamber, the former room of the previous duchess. Sylvia looked around, her gaze settling on something that caught her attention. Following her gaze, the head maid explained that it was a portrait of the previous duke and duchess, along with the current duke. She added the new portrait of Sylvia and the duke would soon be commissioned to replace it. Sylvia stared at the painting, a sense of familiarity washing over her. These people, she had met them in her past life. Memories surfaced of countless attempts to end her own life, only to be brought back, as if her punishment was not yet complete. Deemed a monster, she had been shunned by the villagers, forced to endure their scorn and ostracization. Sylvia's mind drifted back to a memory from her past life. In a desolate wilderness, the Duke and Duchess had found themselves in trouble, and a young woman named Alisa, her former self, had come to their aid. She had warned them against venturing into such a remote area, and directed them towards the main road before turning to leave. The Duke had called out to her, asking for her name, but she had simply told them not to speak of her existence to anyone. Back in the present, Sylvia stood frozen before the portrait of the Duke and Duchess, the realization dawning on her. She had saved them in her past life, never knowing their true identities. Even in their ragged state, she had sensed a noble air about them. Now she understood the cruel irony. Her husband was the child of the very couple she had once rescued. The head maid, watching Sylvia intently, chuckled inwardly at her captivation with the painting, finding her reaction rather amusing. Later that evening, Sylvia relaxed in a warm bath, attended to by a maid. The maid inquired if the water temperature was comfortable, and Sylvia reassured her that it was perfect. Another maid proudly mentioned that a special aromatic oil had been prepared by Neve in celebration of her arrival. The scent was indeed delightful. Sylvia inhaled deeply, savoring the soothing aroma, and expressed her gratitude. Pleased with her satisfaction, the maids beamed, complimenting her beauty. They excitedly praised her, saying that no matter how you looked at it, she possessed a captivating, almost succubus-like charm. When Sylvia jokingly asked if she should gift her face to the maids, they burst into laughter, finding her humor endearing. One confessed that if she could possess Sylvia's beauty for even a single day, she would die happy. However, Sylvia wasn't truly jesting. Her thoughts drifted elsewhere. Her true concern lay with their wedding night. She wanted to go smoothly, preferably quickly. A fleeting thought crossed her mind, wondering if Randall might be a pervert in bed, but she swiftly dismissed it. If he dared to try anything strange, she was fully prepared to knock him unconscious. Standing before the door to their shared room, Sylvia resolved to have it over with within the hour and then go to sleep. She had prepared meticulously. Her hair was impeccably styled. She wore the finest nightgown Thelma had chosen for her, and her natural beauty was undeniable. Inside, Randall sat nervously, his posture stiff. He immediately called out Sylvia's name as she entered. She greeted him warmly, discreetly noting his rather appealing physique. Randall addressed her as his wife, then hesitated, admitting he had something to discuss with her. Sylvia, maintaining her composure, agreed and suggested they sit together. As they settled side by side, Randall blushed, clearly flustered. He reflected on the long and tiring day they had endured. Although their marriage was arranged by the emperor, tradition dictated that the symbolic consummation should only occur when both parties were of one mind. To ease the situation, he decided to tell Sylvia that they could simply rest for the night. Just then, Sylvia suddenly reached out and began undoing Randall's robe. Startled, he asked her what she was doing. She nonchalantly told him to continue while she helped him undress, leaving him flustered. He questioned why she was removing his clothes. Sylvia, unfazed, stated it was their marital duty. But Randall hesitated, insisting he didn't want her to do anything she wasn't comfortable with out of sense of obligation. She assured him she wasn't being forced and considered it her responsibility, proceeding to straddle him. Randall, his face crimson, pointed out that the real question was whether she liked him. Sylvia, without hesitation, affirmed that she did. Still flustered, Randall asked her to get off, saying this was a bit much. Sylvia, misinterpreting his discomfort, suggested a different position, which only increased his fluster. Amused by his reaction, Sylvia suddenly realized Randall's unexpected handsomeness was almost deceptively alluring, like a honey trap, and he seemed completely unaware of it. Deciding to back off, she assured him she wouldn't do anything and began to move off him. However, before she could fully disengage, a sudden wave of exhaustion washed over her, and she collapsed onto him. Panicked, Randall cried out her name, immediately assuming the aftereffect of their earlier encounter with the monsters must be affecting her. He worried she might be injured, and he hadn't noticed. Remembering she was a noble woman, likely unaccustomed to such terrifying sights, he realized the experience must have been traumatic for her. As he looked closer, he realized she had simply fallen asleep. Relieved that it wasn't anything serious, he found himself in an awkward predicament. They were so close that it was difficult to move her without waking her. With her asleep on top of him, he resigned himself to the fact that he probably wouldn't get much sleep tonight. The next morning, Sylvia woke up still drowsy. Upon seeing Randall, she unexpectedly asked if they had consummated their marriage. Randall, stunned by her question, immediately denied it, firmly stating he would never take advantage of someone in such a vulnerable state. Sylvia, amused by his reaction, assured him that wasn't what she meant. But what worried him more was the possibility that she might have done something inappropriate to him in her sleep. Randall, bewildered by her reaction, couldn't help but question her thought process. Later, as they moved to the dining hall, Sylvia was astonished to see the table laden with a seemingly endless array of dishes. She inquired about the reason behind this, and Randall explained that she had been quite exhausted last night, so he'd instructed the chef to prepare a nourishing meal for her. He also mentioned that, to ensure her comfort, he had the servants waiting outside and encouraged her to eat. He gestured for her to begin. Sylvia, looking at the lavish spread, couldn't help but wonder if they truly hadn't consummated their marriage the previous night. It seemed as though nothing had happened. She remembered possibly falling asleep before anything could transpire. She compared this moment to her past life in Flor, where even a single meal had been a luxury. She felt a wave of bewilderment wash over her. Randall watched her closely, seemingly pleased that she was finally receiving proper nourishment. However, Sylvia couldn't shake the feeling that his gaze was akin to that of someone feeding a pet. which slightly irked her. Without hesitation, she addressed him. She inquired as to when they should consummate their marriage, given that they hadn't the night before. Randall, taken aback by her blunt question, firmly reminded her that he didn't want her to do anything out of a sense of obligation, especially when she harbored no feelings for him. However, Sylvia voiced her concerns about the potential ridicule she might face as a duchess whose marriage remained unconsummated. Randall reassured her that no northerner would be so base as to mock her for such a thing, and confidently assured her that she needn't worry. Sylvia pondered Randall's words, thinking that he was indeed young and naive. She couldn't help but recall how humanity had forsaken Alisa, despite her ultimate sacrifice for them. The thought that they couldn't even consummate their marriage like a normal couple on their wedding night made her doubt his conviction about the absence of criticism. She questioned whether he was truly naive or simply foolish. Sylvia decided to take matters into her own hands. She addressed him, knowing that, in order to deceive the eyes of the gods and die a natural death in this lifetime, she needed his cooperation in maintaining the facade of a normal married couple. With this in mind, she proposed a deal. Randall, intrigued, asked what kind of deal she had in mind. Sylvia explained that, since he had declared he wouldn't spend the night with someone he disliked, they should try to develop a fondness for each other. As a first step, they needed to become accustomed to physical contact. She then proposed that, in exchange for the privilege of touching him whenever she pleased, she would give him something he desired in return. Randall, perplexed by her phrasing, questioned what exactly she meant by touching. In response, Sylvia suggested they start with something simple: holding hands. To her surprise, Randall agreed without hesitation. Amused by his swift decision, she asked him if there was anything he wanted in return. Without a moment's hesitation, Randall rose from his seat, approached Sylvia, and offered her a dish. He explained that it was a Belelffort specialty and requested that she finish it all as his first condition. Sylvia stared at the dish, aghast, unnerved by the seemingly innocent yet unexpectedly cruel request. Sylvia and Randall strolled through the garden, their hands intertwined, walking side by side. Randall couldn't help but giggle, which only added to Sylvia's embarrassment. She asked him to stop laughing, clearly flustered by his reaction. Randall apologized, but couldn't help but reflect on the situation. He found it amusing that someone as composed as Sylvia was completely undone by their regional specialty. He also wondered why holding hands was such a significant condition for her. Did he truly seem that cold and unfeeling? Although their marriage was arranged by the emperor, he wouldn't refuse a simple request like holding hands. Besides, he didn't mind the bargain. If Sylvia truly was the king's spy, keeping her close would make it easier to monitor her. The thought pricked his conscience slightly, but Randall shifted the conversation, mentioning that some of his vassals would be arriving in 3 days. Sylvia immediately understood this was in reference to the upcoming banquet, her first formal meeting with them as Duchess. Randall confirmed her guess, noting that the vassals were eager to meet her, most likely out of curiosity. However, as it wouldn't be a large-scale affair, it shouldn't be too difficult for her. He assured her Thelma would assist her throughout the event, and if she needed anything, she could simply have Walcott fetch it. Sylvia considered the task before her. Hosting banquets was typically the duty of the lord or lady of the house, and she had done so a few times in her past life. It wasn't difficult, but finding it somewhat tedious, she decided to approach it in a cursory, yet efficient manner. With that in mind, she assured Randall she would do her best. Randall accepted her words with a satisfied nod, mentioning he had some work to attend to and promised to see her later that evening. As he turned to leave, Sylvia offered him a sweet smile and a fond farewell, playfully calling him dear. Inwardly, she chuckled, considering it a small revenge for making her eat that peculiar dish. At the entrance to the Belelffort duchy, Randall stood with his knights, observing the bustling activity around them. He approached a group of children, greeting them warmly and sighing in relief at their healthy appearance. The children were energized by his presence, calling out to him eagerly, one even requesting a horseback ride. A knight quickly reminded them to behave in the presence of their lord. But Randall simply patted one of the children on the head, addressing them in a gentle yet firm tone. He reminded them to play only within the barrier-protected areas, emphasizing that Austin's barrier didn't extend into the forest. One child hesitated, then confessed they hadn't intended to enter the forest at all. Instead, they had gone elsewhere to gather herbs, as their parents were distressed by the repeated vandalism of their usual herb garden. Understanding dawning on him, Randall apologized, admitting he hadn't known their reasons. He commended their thoughtfulness, but cautioned them to be more careful next time. The children eagerly nodded, bidding him farewell, their voices echoing cheerful goodbyes as they scampered off. Randall watched them go, his expression turning serious. While the herb garden was located in the forest near the village, the repeated vandalism was concerning. The knights regularly hunted wildlife to ensure the area's safety, so the possibility of monsters lurking nearby crossed his mind. However, considering Austin's barriers supposedly protected the village, it seemed unlikely. To be certain, he decided it best to investigate personally. Arriving at the forest with his knights, Randall reminded them of the briefing, warning of the potential for monsters inhabiting the area. He instructed them to remain vigilant until they confirmed the barrier stones were functioning correctly. The knights acknowledged the order and began their search through the forest. Randall noted the unusual quiet of the area, likely due to the lack of visitors. The knights reported back that all seemed in order with no apparent issues. However, upon inspection, Randall realized 4 of the 5 barrier stones were intact, leaving only the one at the forest center to be checked. Reaching the designated location, he ordered everyone to prepare themselves. They stood before a large fountain where a glowing barrier stone was visible, though the surrounding structure appeared damaged. Randall scrutinized the stone, his concern growing as he noticed it was cracked clean in 2. Before he could react further, a giant serpent lunged at them. Meanwhile, back at the manor, Sylvia calmly sipped her tea, a sudden crack appearing on the surface of the cup, catching her eye. The unexpected fissure startled her momentarily. Before she could dwell on it, a maid entered, informing her that Thelma requested her presence. Sylvia acknowledged the message and made her way to the banquet hall. Upon her arrival, Thelma began a tour of the grand space, explaining that it was part of the main castle, renovated by the king for the first duke, a relative. Thus, the once dilapidated castle now boasted a magnificent and refined appearance. Sylvia marveled at the elegance of the hall, realizing it had been recently refurbished. She mused that since guests frequently gathered there, perhaps more regular upkeep would be beneficial. Anticipating this thought, Thelma informed her that she had already summoned the head of the organization responsible for such matters, and he would arrive shortly. While Sylvia initially considered maintaining the status quo, she decided to explore the matter further, realizing the additional maintenance might not be as troublesome as she imagined. Later, in the Belelffort reception room, a man bowed before Sylvia, introducing himself as Sir Chick Hederera, the head of Cheval. Sylvia welcomed him and offered him a seat. Chick surreptitiously appraised her, noting her uncommon beauty and deeming her a young lady lacking in experience. Believing this to be an opportunity to exploit, Chick proceeded to display an array of items for her consideration, claiming he had brought only the latest fashions. As Sylvia examined the goods, the maids fluttered about, admiring the beautiful colors of the tiles and the luxurious material of the drapes. After her inspection, Sylvia deemed the quality acceptable enough. Thelma inquired about the cost, prompting Chick to calculate and declare that the total for the banquet hall's renovation would be 30 gold coins. Thelma and the other maids were visibly shocked, leaving Sylvia puzzled by their reaction. Thelma nervously whispered to Sylvia that the sum Chick requested was more than half of Duke Bellefort's monthly income. Sylvia recalled that a significant portion of the territory's income was allocated to supporting those affected by the demon attacks, making such an expense a considerable burden. Thelma attempted to negotiate, explaining that 30 gold coins was a rather large sum and requesting a slight reduction in price. Chick feigned offense, arguing that his journey to the northern regions was arduous due to the perilous roads and insisting his prices were fair. Thelma fell into his trap, hesitantly inquiring about the possibility of installments. However, Sylvia saw through Chick's ruse and called him out on it. She pointed out that the items he displayed were identical to those she had seen in the capital just months before her marriage. She accused him of bringing unsold stock from the capital and attempting to sell it at inflated prices. Chick, his deception exposed, panicked but hastily attempted to defend himself, insisting the items were the latest trends. Unmoved, Sylvia pressed him further, causing him to grow increasingly flustered. Chick struggled to maintain his composure, desperately reiterating his status, as if his reputation alone could prove his honesty. Sylvia maintained a serene smile, reminding Chick that her full name was Sylvia Flor Belelffort. With the same calm demeanor, she subtly warned him to choose his words carefully, for any falsehood in his speech would make him an enemy of both the Floret and Belelffort families. She further implied that insulting her was tantamount to insulting the royal family, an offense punishable by severe consequences, a risk only a fool would dare to take. Chick, now thoroughly terrified, descended into a panicked frenzy as Sylvia reached for a quill. Desperately, he swiftly lowered the price to 15 gold coins. To prevent further trouble, Thelma informed Randall of Chick's attempted swindle and how Sylvia had handled the situation. Randall, impressed, expressed his gratitude and inquired if Sylvia was in their bedroom. Thelma cheerfully replied that Sylvia had fallen asleep almost immediately after Chick's departure. Randall decided to check on her anyway. Entering the room, he found her sleeping soundly. Careful not to disturb her, he moved quietly and laid down beside her, musing on how much she resembled a homebody. Sylvia, however, soon awoke and, unexpectedly, began to undress him. Randall, startled, stopped her, asking what she was doing. She innocently inquired if he didn't enjoy some intimacy before sleep, to which he flusteredly replied that that wasn't the issue. A frustrated Sylvia argued that while they didn't need to engage in such activities every night, it was a natural part of marriage, and she didn't understand his constant refusals. Randall, conflicted, gently pulled her into an embrace. Inwardly, he questioned how he could possibly act on his desires, faced with her delicate frame. He urged her to sleep, putting an end to the matter for the night. Austin stood silently, observing Randall's incessant smiling, finding his lord's peculiar nature both perplexing and intriguing. Noting his lord's unusual cheerfulness, Austin reflected that while Randall was always amiable, his recent constant smiling was becoming somewhat irritating. He even likened it to a puppy's expression and couldn't resist asking why he was smiling so much. Caught off guard, Randall asked if it was that noticeable. In truth, he couldn't help but smile whenever he recalled the morning's events. Earlier that day, at breakfast, Randall had offered Sylvia some of their local specialty dish. She, however, had displayed a clear distaste for the dish, pushing the plate towards him and declaring that if he ate it, she would allow him to hold her hand, just her hand, but then quickly rescinded the offer. Randall, teasing her further, suggested that he would prefer a hug in return. Sylvia had watched, annoyed, as he consumed the dish, only for him to playfully warn her to be prepared that night, implying she would have to repay him for the bargain. Back in the present, Randall found the memory amusing, speculating that given Sylvia's young age, perhaps she didn't fully grasp what consummation truly entailed. His thoughts were interrupted by Austin calling his name, pulling him back to reality. An irritated Austin pressed him on a serious matter, asking what he intended to do if Sylvia proved to be the king's spy. Randall, maintaining his composure, told Austin he was free to think whatever he wished, but to be careful about what he said in front of others. Realizing his error, Austin quickly apologized for his slip-up. Randall reassured him that as long as he understood, it was fine, then steered the conversation towards a more pressing issue, the need to improve the formula for the barrier stones. Austin agreed, stating the necessity of further reinforcing the barrier. While he could handle the task himself, he admitted it would be quite taxing and hinted at the need for a generous bonus to compensate for the extra effort. Randall, unmoved, simply encouraged him to work diligently. Austin, now cheerful, enthusiastically assured him to leave it all to him. Meanwhile, Sylvia was strolling through the gardens with Thelma. She confirmed that they had no further engagements for the day, and Thelma excitedly complimented her, saying she looked beautiful in everything she wore. Sylvia reflected inwardly, realizing she had lost count of how many dresses she had tried on for the upcoming banquet. She was confident she looked lovely in anything anyway, so she found the whole process rather unnecessary. Still, once she had made her choice, the matter was quickly over, and she was relieved. Continuing her walk, she was startled to see Austin lying face down on the ground, papers scattered around him. Sylvia's surprise at finding Austin sprawled on the ground prompted Thelma to scold him for carelessly dozing off. Annoyed that Austin had fallen asleep wherever he pleased, Thelma listened to his justifications about his carefully chosen and calculated napping spot with a skeptical ear. Still fuming, she berated him as a slacker and offered to escort Sylvia away. However, Sylvia, noticing the perfect light, temperature, and humidity, decided to settle down as well. She assured Austin he could continue his work without worrying about her. Austin, suspicious of Sylvia's uncharacteristic behavior, reminded himself to remain vigilant, as she might still be a spy sent by the king. Sitting beside Austin, Sylvia noticed the magical formula he was studying. She recognized it as a variation of the barrier magic she herself had created when she was Alisa, though it was now far removed from her original design. She observed in silence. Suddenly, Austin cried out in frustration, realizing he had made a mistake and would have to start his calculations anew. Sylvia hesitated to intervene, remembering that she had only helped Sir Chick Hedorera earlier because Thelma and the maids had been struggling. However, after analyzing the situation, she realized that if Austin succeeded in strengthening the barrier, the knights would be more effective against intrusions, ultimately reducing her chances of an untimely demise. With this in mind, Sylvia made her decision. She would ruin. Sylvia asked to see Austin's work, surprising him, as she had never attended Alvarez Academy, unlike his father, who was the vice principal there. Ignoring his dubious look, she snatched the paper with a smile, thinking to herself that Austin, despite being the only one considered worthy of the title of Archmage after Alisa, still had a long way to go, a fact he seemed blissfully unaware of. Instinctively, she began correcting his formula, a habit from her past life. Austin panicked, snatching the paper back, convinced Sylvia had ruined it. However, upon examining her modifications, he was stunned. She had effortlessly untangled the complex formula he had been agonizing over. Feigning ignorance, Sylvia brushed it off, saying someone like her shouldn't interfere in such matters. Before leaving, she casually told Austin not to tell anyone she had corrected the formula. Austin stared after her, incredulous. How could she solve such a difficult problem with such ease and then act as if it were nothing? Realizing how much he had underestimated her, he felt a pang of guilt for his suspicion. Meanwhile, Sylvia, eager to avoid further attention, quickly made her escape. As Randall prepared for the banquet, his steward assisted him, ensuring he looked his absolute best. Randall felt guilty for making Sylvia wait and was surprised by the extra effort being put into his appearance. The steward assured him it was necessary to stand confidently beside his wife and remarked that it was time Randall swallowed his pride. Randall chuckled, admitting his eagerness to see Sylvia. Meanwhile, Sylvia was being dressed and adorned by her maids, who were captivated by her beauty. Despite their excitement, Sylvia was exhausted by the lengthy preparations. Just as she breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was finally over, the maids insisted on admiring her for a few moments longer. Suddenly, a maid rushed in, announcing Randall's arrival. The other maids excitedly urged Sylvia forward, eager to present her to him. Resigning herself to the situation, Sylvia inwardly groaned at the prospect of being paraded around like a doll at the banquet and vowed to find a way to escape next time. As Sylvia approached Randall, she was momentarily stunned by his appearance, noticing a blush creep onto his face. Randall, equally flustered, couldn't tear his gaze away from her. As Sylvia apologized for making him wait, Randall unexpectedly took her hand, sincerely complimenting her beauty, taking her slightly by surprise. Sylvia teased him, playfully suggesting that if he liked her dress so much, she could wear it to bed that night. Randall instantly flushed crimson, stammering her name in embarrassment, but she quickly laughed it off, saying it didn't quite have the intended effect. Hand in hand, the couple entered the grand banquet hall, where guests were celebrating their marriage. Randall formally introduced Sylvia as the mistress of Belelffort, emphasizing that she should be regarded as his equal. Sylvia, in turn, addressed the guests with grace, wishing them joy and peace. The guests admired the harmony between them, commenting on their striking appearance and seemingly strong bond. Many who had harbored doubts due to Sylvia's connection to the royal family were reassured by the evident rapport between the couple. However, one blonde-haired woman did not share the general enthusiasm. Her expression clearly conveyed displeasure. The banquet continued, with Randall warmly greeting the nobles. He welcomed Marquee Malta Saker, exchanging pleasantries before inquiring after the Marquis's daughter, Philia. He learned that she had journeyed south to observe the war and had not yet returned. The Marquis sighed wearily, lamenting his daughter's reckless nature and inability to behave like a proper lady. Randall chuckled, recalling how Sylvia had always been a tomboy since childhood. Turning to more serious matters, he inquired about the war in the south. The Marquis reported that the war was nearing its end, despite the crown prince charging around the battlefield like a madman. Meanwhile, Sylvia observed Randall from a distance. She noted how different he was from the other high-ranking nobles. Unlike those who flaunted their status, Randall treated everyone with equality, never displaying superiority despite his power. She found this intriguing, yet dangerous. His honest and sharp gaze seemed to pierce through to her very soul. Rubia, the sharp-witted blonde woman, approached Sylvia and introduced herself with formal courtesy. However, Sylvia immediately sensed Rubia's intentions. She was the type of blindly loyal follower who would defy even their lord's wishes if they believed it was for his own good. Sylvia could tell from the way Rubia looked at her that she disapproved. Without delay, Rubia directly questioned Sylvia about her marriage to Randall. She pointed out that the Northern Territories had lost many political opportunities due to this union, as marriage was a crucial tool for expanding influence. She further insinuated that Sylvia's family, loyal to the king, could not possibly offer the political support Randall needed. In her view, there were many other women far more suitable to be the Duchess of Belelffort. Rubia expected Sylvia to react with fluster, tears, wavering, or emotional outbursts, demonstrating her weakness before the gathered nobles. But Sylvia did not crumble. Instead, she responded with a calm and indifferent "so." Rubia was shocked and incredulous. This was not the reaction she had anticipated. Sylvia chuckled softly, retorting, "Could merely talking about it dissolve the marriage?" A strange tension filled the air. Sylvia then told her that if she couldn't accept her as the Duchess, she should take it up with the king. Rubia floundered, struggling to respond. Sylvia calmly pointed out that neither she nor Randall had arranged the marriage, rendering Rubia's accusations unfair. She found the whole argument tired and unoriginal. Suddenly, a magical portal appeared in the center of the banquet hall. Rubia gasped as a massive, octopus-like monster emerged from it. Panic erupted. People began to flee in terror, screaming about demons. Seeing Sylvia dangerously close to the creature, Randall yelled for her to run. However, Sylvia merely stared at the monster, thinking that perhaps this was her chance to finally die peacefully and without question. Before she could react, Rubia grabbed her hand and pulled her to safety, demanding to know why she hadn't dodged the attack. Sylvia found the situation troublesome. The monster then turned its attention to Rubia, but Sylvia shielded her with her own body, taking the brunt of the attack. Bleeding and weakening, Sylvia's consciousness began to fade, her eyes slowly closing. Sylvia opened her eyes to find herself in a different body, her vision showing her near a body of water. Beside her, a boy sat beneath a tree, seemingly consumed by grief. A wave of bewilderment washed over her as she realized she was back in her first life as Alisa. The boy beside her looked familiar. Curiosity piqued. She asked for his name. She remembered asking the same question back then. The boy introduced himself as Cleon. However, Sylvia mistakenly called him Leo, much to his dismay. He corrected her, but she continued to call him Leo and invited him to come with her. Though irritated, he was grateful to her for saving him from the demons. He agreed, telling her to call him whatever she liked. Sylvia remembered this boy following her out of the woods, later becoming the errand boy of their small squad. However, doubt gnawed at her. Had she misremembered? Was this boy truly the warrior, Cleon? The scene shifted, and Sylvia awoke in the present, lying in bed. She realized she had survived, once again, cheated death. But confusion still clung to her. If Leo was Cleon, then it meant Cleon was the one who ultimately slew the demon king, Alisa. Randall sat beside Sylvia. As she stirred, his tense features softened with relief. He told her not to get up yet. Austin had healed her wounds with magic, but there might be lingering after effects. However, Sylvia noticed something unusual about him and ignored his warning. Sitting up, she reached out and touched his face, realizing he had been crying. Touched, she gently patted his cheek, surprised by the depth of his concern. His unwavering gaze unsettled her, a silent promise that he would always be there, no matter what. A small smile played on her lips as she teased him, calling his behavior endearing. Randall blushed, a flush creeping up his neck, admitting he had been truly worried. Sylvia opened her arms, inviting him to warm her. She insisted she was merely cold, not trying to bargain for anything. Randall embraced her, holding her close. She chuckled softly, remarking on how their current situation was the reverse of their usual dynamic. Randall then mentioned that after slaying the demon, he had sent a letter to her parents, informing them of her injuries. Sylvia acknowledged his thoughtfulness with a smile, but he added that he had asked them to delay their visit. The modified barrier stones Austin had been working on weren't fully installed yet, and it was still dangerous. Sylvia breathed a sigh of relief, grateful things wouldn't become more complicated. However, Randall continued, explaining there was another option. He suggested sending her back to the Flor County. While Austin might object, the county was close to the capital. Using teleportation magic to send her directly to her old bed was feasible and wouldn't put too much strain on her body. Sylvia's eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean?" she asked. Randall then revealed his true intentions. He believed she now realized how dangerous the North was. It wasn't an ideal place for anyone to live. With that in mind, he had decided to send her back to her family's estate. A knot of tension formed in Sylvia's stomach. Randall was suggesting sending her away so soon after their wedding. The set of his jaw told her he had been contemplating this decision for a while. However, for her, leaving him meant being further from death, and that was something she couldn't accept. She argued that leaving might jeopardize her position as Duchess, but Randall assured her no one would dare challenge her status. When she brought up her responsibilities as mistress of the castle, he countered that he had handled many of those duties before their marriage, so things would simply revert back to how they were. Guilt gnawed at Randall. He had been too careless. The dark worms had infiltrated the duchy. He should have been more vigilant, instead of suspecting Sylvia of being a spy. If he had been more careful, she wouldn't have come so close to death. Sending her away was the right decision. Seeing his resolve, Sylvia searched for a way to change his mind. She embraced him, whispering that the North was her home. She loved Thelma and the other maids, loved Austin, but most of all, she loved him. A silence followed, making her wonder if her words had sounded insincere. Randall, however, thanked her and apologized again. Sylvia playfully scolded him for always saying sorry, pointing out that he himself was quite stubborn. He admitted it with a small smile, and as their eyes met, a blush crept onto both their faces. Sensing the moment, Sylvia leaned in, intending to kiss him, but Randall startled, jumping up in a fluster. In his haste, he accidentally jostled her, sending her tumbling in a tangle of blankets. He stammered a quick goodbye, muttering something about fetching the physician, and hurried out of the room. Left alone, Sylvia chuckled to herself, thinking that at least he seemed lively on the outside. After the interaction with Sylvia, Randall found himself in a state of disarray, his emotions turbulent. Chiding himself, he tried to regain his composure, reminding himself that she was injured and he had unresolved matters to attend to. His expression darkened as he recalled the events from earlier. In a flashback, the banquet hall was a scene of chaos, blood staining the floor after Randall had slain the monster. His voice, thick with fury, demanded to know who had brought such a menace into his castle, mentioning a gem inscribed with a teleportation spell. A terrified silence fell over the room. With a steely voice, Randall delivered a final warning. If the culprit confessed now, only their life would be forfeit. But if they remained silent, he would hunt them down and destroy their entire bloodline. His rage intensified as he demanded to know who dared to harm his wife. A terrified Rubia hesitantly raised her hand, revealing that the gem had been attached to the flounce of her gown, entangled in the lace. Randall's gaze sharpened, demanding an explanation. Her father, panicked, whispered for her to stay quiet, fearing she would become a suspect. Rubia, however, felt it was a crucial clue. Stepping forward, she explained that after the demon appeared in the banquet hall, she had torn her dress to bandage Sylvia's wounds. It was then that she noticed the gem fall to the floor, though she had been too preoccupied with helping Sylvia at the time. She was certain the gem she saw was the one in question. Randall reviewed the investigation, recalling how Lady Clever's testimony had helped trace the culprit. A vassal, initially silent for fear of suspicion, later confessed and identified his servant as the one responsible. The servant was apprehended and executed, his head impaled on a spike as punishment. Before his death, he admitted to receiving a substantial sum from a stranger he met on the street, implying the mastermind behind the attack was connected to the Dark Worms. Determined to eradicate this threat, Randall resolved to act swiftly. In the next scene, Sylvia was surrounded by her maids, who were overjoyed to see her awake and seemingly well. Tears streamed down their faces as they expressed their relief and excitement, showering her with affection. One proudly displayed a doll they had crafted in her likeness while praying for her recovery. Thanks to Austen's magic, Sylvia felt fully recovered, but she decided to continue feigning weakness to garner sympathy. She thanked the maids and told them she needed more rest. Her words, however, only spurred them on further and with renewed determination. The maids enthusiastically declared they would prepare something special. Sylvia was puzzled until she saw a dazzling array of food placed before her. Astonished, she struggled to decline, but the maids eagerly encouraged her to eat, insisting it was a special, healthy meal made just for her. Looking at their loving and concerned faces, Sylvia found herself unable to refuse. After the meal, Sylvia and Thelma strolled through the gardens, Sylvia feeling uncomfortably full. Thelma praised Sylvia for finishing all her food, much to the maid's delight, and offered her a cloak as the evening air grew cooler. Sylvia accepted the cloak absently, her thoughts preoccupied with Lady Clever, Rubia, who had tended her wounds. She was surprised that Rubia had been able to set aside her personal feelings and do what was right. However, a wave of unease washed over Sylvia as she recalled shielding Rubia from the attack and the unsettling memory of her father's presence there. Continuing her stroll, Sylvia spotted Rubia, noticing a flicker of nervousness in the maid as she approached. Sylvia offered a warm smile and greeted her, thanking her for her timely intervention and admitting that she might not have survived without her help. Rubia hesitated for a moment before shyly thanking Sylvia for saving her. Flustered, she mumbled an excuse and hurried away. Sylvia, puzzled by Rubia's reaction, jokingly asked Thelma if she'd witnessed magic, as time seemed to have accelerated. Thelma chuckled softly, explaining that Rubia was simply shy. Sylvia found this surprising, but shifted the conversation to another topic. She inquired about Marquee, Rubia's father, specifically whether he was close to Randall. Thelma confirmed that their bond was indeed strong. Curious, Sylvia asked if there had ever been any incidents between them that might have strained their relationship. At this, Thelma sighed, explaining that to understand their history, one had to go back decades, to a time when the palace was embroiled in chaos due to a struggle for the throne. However, despite the political turmoil, the two princes involved were close brothers who had no desire for such conflict. In a flashback, the two princes engaged in a heartfelt conversation about the power struggle for the throne. The younger brother assured the elder that he had no intention of harming him and believed that he was the rightful heir. The elder brother, however, was troubled by the escalating conflict among their vassals, unsure of how to resolve the situation. The younger brother proposed a solution. He would leave the capital and journey to the north. The elder brother, shocked, protested, insisting that such a drastic measure wasn't necessary. But the younger brother was resolute, explaining that it was the surest way to end the unrest. Since the north was barren and forsaken, he believed he could find purpose there, accepting his fate as the defeated contender for the throne. The brothers embraced emotionally. Thelma continued her story, revealing that the younger prince left his castle in Rockland and assumed a new identity, Belelffort. He became Duke Elvis Belelffort, father of the previous Duke, Randall Belelffort. After settling in the north, Duke Elvis successfully united the scattered noble families of the region. His genuine dedication to the north won the support of the once indifferent and divided nobles, uniting them under his leadership. Sylvia absorbed the story, hesitated, and then acknowledged that the previous duke was no longer alive. Thelma confirmed this gravely, explaining that the previous duke and duchess had both perished while fighting demons. That tragic loss marked the beginning of Duke Randall's hardships, as he was still very young at the time. In a flashback, the elders of the North were engaged in a heated debate, skeptical of young Randall's ability to lead. They deemed him powerless, questioning his capacity to fight demons or go to war. Some even suggested choosing a leader from among themselves, while others accused them of acting out of self-interest. Meanwhile, young Randall eavesdropped on their conversation, feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in his chest. However, one day, he appeared before them, covered in blood, dragging the severed hand of a monster he had slain, his other hand gripping his sword. He presented his trophy, declaring that he wanted to prove he wasn't useless. But before he could finish speaking, he stumbled and collapsed. This stunned everyone present. Thelma explained that when the commentators heard of Randall's actions, they sympathized with him and began criticizing the greedy vassals. Their support caused such an uproar that eventually, even the current king, initially wary of Randall, accepted his inheritance of the dukedom. However, the king imposed one condition. Randall had to live with the prince until he turned 10 to be kept under observation. During this period of political struggle, Marquee played a key role in uniting the nobles, securing Randall's rightful position as duke. From Randall's perspective, the Marquee had protected him during his vulnerable years, which is why the strong bond of trust between them endured to this day. Sylvia, initially assuming Randall had led a peaceful life due to his gentle nature, was taken aback upon learning of his tragic past. She realized how deep Randall's trust in Marquee truly ran. She pondered whether she should tell Randall if she discovered any connection between the Marquee and the Dark Worms, acutely aware of the devastating impact betrayal had wrought upon her own life. She believed she could handle such news, but pure-hearted Randall would surely crumble. Later that night, Sylvia was still awake when Randall entered the room, asking why she hadn't slept yet. She playfully reminded him of his promise to embrace her without a blanket separating them and urged him to join her. Randall blushed, reluctantly sitting beside her, only to be startled by Sylvia suddenly throwing herself at him. Flustered, he questioned her actions, but she insisted it was nothing strange and told him to stay still. Sylvia then removed his shirt, revealing the scars on his back. The sight of them filled her with a deep sense of concern. Realizing how much pain he must have endured as a child to prove himself and secure his home. Noticing her sadness, Randall reassured her that he was fine and gently cupped her face. Though he knew he shouldn't, a flicker of joy warmed him at the sight of Sylvia's worry for him. However, just as he began to savor the moment, the unexpected happened, causing him to blush crimson. While working in the forest, Austin reported to Randall that the stone replacement was nearing completion. Randall praised his efforts and prepared to move on, but hesitantly asked Austin for advice. Austin, ever businesslike, requested a consultation fee of 1 copper coin per minute. Randall reluctantly agreed. Then, presenting it as a hypothetical situation concerning a friend, he explained that this friend's lover seemed interested only in the physical aspects of their relationship, leaving him feeling like she only wanted his body. He asked Austin what his friend should do. Austin first inquired whether this friend truly cared for his lover. Randall hesitated at first, but then realized that if he didn't care, he wouldn't be worried in the first place. In that reflection, a deeper realization dawned on him. He truly cared for Sylvia. He recalled the moments of elation at her concern, the frustration at her seeming indifference to his feelings, and the instances of being captivated by her every word and action. He finally understood. I want you to want me, willingly. He acknowledged his feelings for Sylvia, something he had failed to recognize before. Austin then advised that the first step was to buy the lover a gift, emphasizing that expensive gifts worked best. Randall expressed skepticism, but Austin insisted that making the other person feel special through gestures would eventually lead them to value the relationship beyond mere physical attraction. Taking his advice to heart, Randall decided his friend must try harder to win his lover's heart. Sylvia, accompanied by her knights, paid Rubia a visit, much to her surprise. Rubia, startled by the Duchess's presence, asked her the reason for her visit. Sylvia casually replied that she wanted to take a walk, but didn't know who to approach. Rubia, feeling uneasy, expressed her discomfort. Sylvia responded playfully, asking if saving Rubia's life wasn't enough to make them friends. Rubia hesitated for a moment, but eventually agreed to accompany Sylvia. A short while later, the two women were making their way through the bustling marketplace. Sylvia expressed her gratitude to Rubia for joining her, to which Rubia politely replied that it was her pleasure. Sylvia then inquired after Rubia's well-being since their last encounter, and Rubia assured her she was fine. Just as they continued their stroll, a booming voice suddenly called out to Rubia. The voice addressed her as little girl. A puzzled Rubia looked around, spotting a fishmonger who recognized her. The vendor playfully chided her, saying he thought she wasn't coming today. Rubia sighed, telling him he was being impertinent and insisting that she was not his daughter. The fishmonger and his wife laughed, saying they never claimed she was their daughter, only that she was like a daughter to them. Though annoyed, Rubia didn't argue further. Sylvia stared at Rubia, prompting her to ask if Sylvia was trying to bewitch her with her beauty. Sylvia simply commented that she thought Rubia wouldn't enjoy crowded places. Rubia scoffed, saying that as a noble of the North, she was merely fulfilling her duties, and it shouldn't be surprising. Sylvia insisted that she was still surprised. Sylvia's teasing continued, causing Rubia some irritation. By way of apology, Sylvia offered Rubia a butterfly brooch, but Rubia refused it. Sylvia told her she had already paid for it, so Rubia reluctantly accepted. She mumbled her thanks. Sylvia smiled, thinking how adorable Rubia looked when she let her guard down. As they prepared to leave, Rubia commented that Sylvia always got what she wanted. As evening approached, the two walked in an awkward silence until Rubia finally asked Sylvia why she had brought her here. Sylvia reminded Rubia of what she had said in the ballroom. At the time, she had claimed Sylvia couldn't possibly help the North. Sylvia admitted that Rubia wasn't entirely wrong. She didn't know much about the North. However, she intended to change that by learning. She then asked Rubia, with her deep understanding of the region, if she would be willing to help her. Rubia turned away flustered. She demanded to know why she should help Sylvia. Sylvia calmly replied that as long as she lived, Rubia would never become duchess, so it would be wiser to assist her instead. Rubia glared at her, but Sylvia remained unfazed. Sylvia then commented on how close Rubia and her father seemed, recalling how he had risked himself to protect her during the demon attack. Rubia admitted that since her mother's death, her father had raised her alone, teaching her archery. She described him as a kind man. Inwardly, Sylvia wondered if Rubia was unaware of any potential schemes her father might be involved in. Rubia continued, praising her father as a great man who had helped the Duke rise to power and was well respected by the villagers. However, she noted he had been overworked lately, though he often took walks and breaks to relax. Mid-sentence, she abruptly stopped, realizing she had said too much, accusing Sylvia of using her alluring power to make her divulge information. Rubia found the situation outrageous. Sylvia playfully retorted that Rubia had been the one doing all the talking, and her beauty was simply natural. A frustrated Rubia grumbled in annoyance, while Sylvia gloated that this was exactly what she wanted. As night fell, Geoffrey observed Sylvia and Rubia, noting a strange resemblance between them. Suddenly, he sensed someone behind him and quickly turned, sharply asking who was there. To his surprise, it was Randall. Sylvia and Rubia also turned to see Randall approaching, carrying a duck plushie and flowers. Sylvia asked about the gifts in surprise, particularly the duck plushie. Randall explained that he remembered her mentioning her room being a bit cold, so he got her a cute duck filled with warm stones to keep her cozy. Austin and Geoffrey watched the scene unfold in silent, awkward observation. Geoffrey, bewildered, asked Austin about Randall's choice of gifts. Austin sighed, admitting he had tried and failed to stop Randall and had only realized too late that the friend Randall had mentioned in their earlier conversation was, in fact, himself. He lamented that he had been too focused on money to notice. Geoffrey sweated silently, inwardly fretting over whether the man, representing the North, truly had such poor taste. He worried Sylvia might not appreciate the gift, and perhaps, if Randall didn't learn to read her better, she might even start contemplating divorce. Sylvia's initial reaction was disappointment. Had Randall given her a stuffed duck to cuddle so she wouldn't cuddle him? Was this his way of creating distance? However, noticing the nervous tension etched on his face, she chose to spare his feelings. A soft smile touched her lips. Seeing her smile, Randall visibly relaxed, his face brightening with relief. Rubia, Geoffrey, and Austin, however, were stunned by Sylvia's unexpected reaction. Sylvia offered genuine thanks for the gift, to which Randall replied, suggesting they return home together. Watching them, Rubia reflected on her own feelings. She admitted to herself that her previous belief in having a chance To become the Duchess hadn't been born of love, but rather a desire for the glory and honor of the North. She had even considered seducing Randall to displace Sylvia. However, seeing the way Randall looked at Sylvia now, she realized diverting his affections was an impossible feat. Accepting this, she decided it was best to abandon her schemes. The eve's festivities were a prelude to the hunting competition held at Belelffort Castle, intended to stir the competitive spirit of the participants. Sylvia, however, found herself uninterested in the event. Her attention was fixed on Randall's unusual behavior. She hadn't initially thought much of the stuffed duck, but since that day, Randall had been acting strangely, showering her with gifts. Flashback. One day, Randall excitedly presented Sylvia with a special twig from the north, claiming it made a healthy tea. Sylvia thanked him, but a seed of suspicion began to sprout within her. The next day, he gifted her a jade turtle figurine, explaining that placing it on the bed was said to improve marital relations. Sylvia's unease grew day after day, resisting the urge to give in to her doubts. Randall continued to surprise her with more gifts, leaving Sylvia bewildered by his sudden generosity. Sylvia began to wonder if Randall had genuinely fallen in love with her. She recalled how she had initially tried to seduce him simply to sleep with him, but now she worried that if he truly loved her, he wouldn't be able to cope after her death. The thought gnawed at her. Sighing, she confided her concerns to Rubia, who brushed them off, questioning why Sylvia would even tell her such things. Sylvia, however, insisted that friends shared such things, believing they had grown close. Rubia scoffed at the notion, asking Sylvia if she'd ever even had a friend before. Sylvia admitted she hadn't. At that moment, Rubia picked up her bow, preparing to leave. Sylvia, noticing this, inquired if she was participating in the eve's hunt. Rubia confirmed, stating it was better than listening to Sylvia boast about her husband. Sylvia was taken aback by the accusation, but Rubia ignored her, turning to leave, warning Sylvia not to follow. However, Sylvia stepped closer, reaching out a hand, causing Rubia's heart to skip a beat and a blush to creep up her cheeks. Gently, Sylvia pointed out that Rubia's ribbon was loose and proceeded to tie it for her. Rubia mumbled her thanks, flustered, and made a hasty exit. Sylvia smiled warmly, wishing her to be careful. Rubia walked into the forest with her bow, preparing for the hunt. As she walked, the image of Sylvia's gesture flickered in her mind, but she quickly pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. As she debated whether to venture deeper into the woods, she suddenly spotted her father in the distance. Surprised, she wondered what he was doing there, as she had assumed he would only attend the banquet, having no interest in the hunt. Excited to see him, she called out, but stopped short when she heard an unfamiliar voice. Sensing something amiss, Rubia concealed herself behind a tree, straining to hear the conversation between her father and another figure. The exchange revealed a startling truth. Her father was conspiring with someone. They discussed a past incident in the banquet hall, seemingly plotting something significant. As Rubia watched closely, she realized with dawning horror that the figure conversing with her father wasn't human, but a demon. Her heart pounded as the terrible implications sank in. Could her father have been involved in orchestrating the demonic attack at the banquet? Her father sternly reminded the demon to uphold their agreement. To this, the demon responded with a chilling declaration. He vowed revenge against Randall and promised Rubia's father that he would take his place as ruler of the North. The demon scoffed at human ambition, finding their lust for power incomprehensible. Hidden in the shadows, Rubia watched in horror, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. She considered slaying the demon to mitigate her father's transgression, knowing that consorting with demons was a grave offense. However, before she could act, the demon noticed her, addressing her directly and recognizing her as the Marquee's daughter. Shock and fear coursed through her as Rubia realized the demon was Raphael, the Shatterer, a notorious lesser demon who had crossed over from the Twisted Lands years ago. Weak but aggressive, he had continually challenged Randall, only to be defeated and nearly destroyed each time. His threats against Randall were infamous, even amongst the children of the North. Seeing him here now, Rubia understood his recent silence. He had been plotting in secret. Panic seized her. Was it already too late to flee and warn the others? Raphael seized Rubia's arm and called out to her father, the Marquee, revealing that she had overheard their conversation. The Marquee, shocked and enraged, pulled Rubia towards him, demanding an explanation. However, realizing the situation, He brushed her words aside, telling Raphael that he was leaving. As he dragged Rubia away, she pleaded desperately with him, hoping that his alliance with the demon was merely a ruse to trap Raphael. However, her father silenced her with a harsh command and revealed his true intentions. He insisted he was merely reclaiming the power that belonged to their family, the power they held before the arrival of Belelffort. Just one more day, he assured Rubia, and she would no longer have to struggle to become a duchess. Heartbroken, Rubia protested, explaining that she wanted to protect their family's legacy, not gain power through treachery. But the Marquee coldly warned her that if their dealings with the demon were exposed, she too would be executed, ordering her to remain silent. He departed, and a dark energy seeped from Rubia, a manifestation of her despair. Meanwhile, in Sylvia's chambers, that same dark energy found her and informed her of what had transpired. Recognizing Raphael as one of the lesser demons, Sylvia remained calm. She assured the entity that the barrier protecting the region wouldn't react to anything weaker than the darkness of a true demon. Thanking the energy for its assistance, she bade it rest, and it dissipated. Sylvia reflected on the treason she had uncovered, finding it unimpressive, yet unexpectedly useful. She was glad she had the foresight to attach a stray soul to Lady Cleave. However, she remained undecided on her next course of action. Aware that she was being watched, she refused to act beyond the orders she had been given, namely, not to commit suicide. She wondered what Rubia would do, realizing any misstep could lead to her and her father's execution for treason. With disgust, Sylvia thought to herself, humans were as despicable as ever. The next day, during the festivities, Randall approached Sylvia, expressing his delight at the beautiful weather and his anticipation for the hunting competition. Sylvia greeted him and, unexpectedly, requested to hold his hand as they walked. Maintaining an emotional distance, she intended only to observe how things unfolded. If her involvement in this treason led to her death, she was prepared to accept it. As they strolled, Sylvia suddenly spoke to Randall, demanding his full attention. She teased him, implying that if he continued to stare at her so intently, she might assume he desired to consummate their marriage. Randall blushed crimson, flustered by her words, and struggled to compose himself. He believed Sylvia's suggestion lacked genuine sentiment, and, determined not to burden her with his feelings, resolved to conceal them more effectively. As the activities commenced, Randall prepared to leave Sylvia's side. In an uncharacteristic moment of concern, Sylvia told him not to get hurt. Randall, touched yet skeptical, assumed she cared only for his physical well-being, not for him as a person. Nevertheless, he reciprocated her concern, advising her to stay safe. Before he could depart, Rubia and her father, the Marquee Glaive, approached Sylvia. Noticing Rubia's arrival, Sylvia inquired if she was participating in the competition. Rubia confirmed her participation, stating she had come to greet Sylvia and request her handkerchief. Sylvia was surprised by the request. As in Elbereth, handkerchiefs were traditionally given to knights, family, or close friends before battle, not a leisurely hunting competition. Consequently, she hadn't even given one to Randall. She questioned Rubia's motive, as they were not family. Rubia, smiling, insisted that Sylvia was her only friend. When Sylvia expressed doubt, Rubia playfully reminded her that she had never explicitly denied their friendship. Suspecting Rubia might have ulterior motives, especially having arrived with her father, Sylvia reluctantly handed over her handkerchief. As Rubia reached out to take it, she discreetly slipped Sylvia a hidden note, ensuring her father remained oblivious. Smiling, she asked Sylvia if there was any particular game she would like her to hunt in return. Sylvia declined the offer and urged her to leave, pointing out the imminent start of the competition. Before departing with her father, Rubia slyly remarked that she would find an animal that resembled Sylvia. After their polite farewells, Sylvia unfolded the note Rubia had surreptitiously passed to her. Realizing Rubia couldn't speak freely, she wondered if it was a plea for help, a confession, or an offer to testify against her father in exchange for leniency. As she read the note, Geoffrey approached, casually asking who she thought would win the competition and mentioning the current betting trends among the participants. Sylvia didn't respond, still absorbing the note's contents. When Geoffrey addressed her again, she murmured in disbelief, questioning how anyone could do such a thing. Confused, Geoffrey asked what she meant, but Sylvia brushed him off. Instead, she abruptly announced her desire to find Randall, catching Geoffrey off guard. With newfound resolve, she declared her intention to participate in the competition as well and strode off purposefully. Meanwhile, in the forest, Marquee Gleave, noticing Rubia's somber expression, reassured her that if their plan succeeded, it would secure their control over the north. He admitted his initial concern when she had wanted to speak with Sylvia, but was relieved she hadn't divulged anything crucial. He praised her cleverness and cautioned her to remain silent, reminding her that her only flaw had always been a tendency towards indiscretion. Rubia obediently followed, but inwardly understood the true reason her father had brought her along. To remind her of her complicity, she silently wondered if Sylvia had received her message. The note revealed Rubia's urgent plea to Sylvia. She informed Sylvia that her father, Marquee Gleave, was conspiring with the demon Raphael to commit treason. She suspected they planned to summon a demonic beast during the hunting competition. Rubia pleaded with Sylvia to alert the Duke immediately, confessing her own failure to prevent her father's transgression, and to accept whatever punishment might come. She urged Sylvia to act swiftly as time was running out. Rubia consoled herself with the thought that Sylvia must have read her note and taken action by now. This meant her father would be stopped and everything would return to normal. Meanwhile, Raphael and Marquee Gleave met in the forest, confirming their plans. The Marquis handed over a gem, and they prepared to await the signal. Rubia reflected on her past behavior towards the Duchess, ashamed of her own arrogance. Suddenly, a massive portal appeared, and a wave of dread washed over Rubia. Raphael, filled with glee, declared that the gateway to the demonic realm was open. He then instructed the Marquis to hand over the gem. As the Marquis retrieved the gem, Rubia, overwhelmed by fear, closed her eyes and silently prayed for it all to stop. Before the gem could be used, an arrow suddenly shattered it. Raphael, enraged, demanded to know who had interfered. Randall arrived with his knights, bows still drawn, ready to confront Raphael and the Marquis. Seeing Randall, Rubia felt a wave of relief. He declared Garnet Gleave, now considered an equal to a demon, and would be arrested for conspiring to betray the North. Raphael, caught off guard, turned to the Marquis in shock, demanding an explanation. The Marquis, anxious and bewildered, realized that Rubia might have secretly warned Randall. Rubia smiled, glancing at Randall, relieved that the Duchess must have relayed her message. Randall turned to Rubia, his expression grim, and accused her of treason. He expressed his disappointment, believing she had conspired with her father against the North. He declared that both she and the Marquis would be arrested. Rubia, shocked and confused, questioned what had happened to the message she sent to the Duchess. Randall then addressed Raphael, mocking his failed scheme, and stating he should have known his place. Frustrated, Raphael muttered under his breath, then summoned a shadow demon. Undeterred, Randall reassured his knights that it was merely the weak magic of a lesser demon and instructed them not to be afraid. Emboldened by his words, the knights stepped forward. Suddenly, the Marquis grabbed Rubia, holding a knife to her throat, threatening Randall and his men. He ordered everyone to halt, warning them that if they moved, he would harm Rubia. A flashback then showed a prisoner grinning at Randall before his execution. The prisoner revealed that a man he'd just met on the street had offered him a sum of money too great to refuse. Later, Randall was seen walking with Austin. Austin, exhausted from days of searching, expressed out about finding the person responsible. He complained of being both physically and mentally drained. Randall glared at him, prompting Austin to quickly correct himself, acknowledging that the culprit who endangered the Duchess and smuggled the evil artifact into the castle must be found. Satisfied with his response, Randall ordered him to continue the search. Austin sighed, agreeing to look further, while jokingly requesting a bonus from Randall as compensation for his efforts. Randall then noticed Marquee Cleaver and pointed him out. Austin was surprised, noting the absence of the Cleaver family crest on the carriage, suggesting a clandestine meeting. Randall ordered Austin to follow him, but then decided to tail the Marquis alone. The Marquis arrived at a secret meeting place with an unknown man. A man asked the Marquis if he had dealt with the tale. The Marquee confirmed he had, calling the executed man a fool who had sold his soul for coin. The execution, he explained, was carried out immediately on the Duchess's orders. The mysterious man then inquired whether everything else was proceeding according to plan. The Marquis answered in the affirmative, explaining that their chosen location was near the forest where the hunting competition was to be held. He grumbled that things would have been much easier if Randall had given him the exact coordinates. But since Randall insisted on secrecy, he had to manage without them. Unseen, Randall and Austin listened in on their conversation. Austin hesitantly called out Randall's name, but Randall remained composed. He declared that personal feelings were irrelevant. Their priority was to uncover the full extent of the plan and secure evidence to prevent the impending catastrophe. Their objective clear, Randall decided they should return to the castle. At that moment, Austin, consumed by rage, moved to confront the Marquis. The Marquis, with his horse and a magical portal at the ready for escape, warned that any rash actions would cost Rubia her life. Rubia, her voice trembling, reminded her father of the values he had instilled in her. Their lives were meant to be spent protecting the people and ensuring the safety of the Lord to whom they swore fealty. In a desperate attempt to uphold her honor, she attempted to harm herself, only to be struck down by Randall. In that final moment, Randall glimpsed an unfamiliar energy and realized its source was Sylvia. In the aftermath of the incident, a public announcement was issued informing everyone of the consequences of the recent treason. Raphael, implicated in dealings with the demonic race, had been executed. Marquis Glaive, the mastermind behind the conspiracy, was sentenced to death. However, his daughter, Rubia Glaive, was spared punishment for reporting her father's crimes. At the estate, Rubia lay ill in bed, with Sylvia attending to her. After some time, Rubia regained consciousness, telling Sylvia, with a touch of embarrassment, that she needn't fuss over her. Sylvia acknowledged her awakening and admitted her failure to deliver the message in time. She insisted that caring for Rubia was her way of making amends, adding that Rubia must remain there until her neck had fully healed. Sylvia then inquired whether Rubia had been informed of what had transpired. Rubia confirmed that she had, mentioning that she had arrived after her father's arrest. In truth, upon seeing Rubia held hostage, Sylvia had summoned dark powers to pull Rubia away from her father. However, by the time she arrived, Randall was already confronting the Marquis. Sylvia couldn't help but wonder how Randall had known about the plot beforehand. Rubia then commented that Sylvia seemed remarkably capable, almost as if accustomed to handling such situations. Sylvia dismissed the notion, saying Rubia was mistaken, and changed the subject. She then asked Rubia how she had done it. Rubia, confused, asked what she meant. Sylvia recalled the time she had injured her back, and now this. Rubia always seemed to take such pride in what she had, yet she let go so easily. She questioned how a human, like Rubia, could act the way she did in the face of losing everything, including possibly her own life. Rubia found Sylvia's question odd, explaining that she simply did what any person should do, questioning what other reason was needed. Sylvia hesitated, then agreed, deciding to let Rubia rest. Before leaving the room, she bid Rubia farewell. As she walked away, she silently repeated Rubia's words, pondering their meaning. A short while later, Randall arrived, calling Sylvia's name. She greeted him, and he mentioned he was there to walk back to her chambers with her. He then inquired if Miss Glaive was asleep. Sylvia, instead of answering directly, looked at him with concern and asked, "Randall, are you all right?" Touched by her concern, Randall assured Sylvia he was fine, though he admitted to being unsettled by the events. He repeated that he was still all right, and Sylvia instinctively felt his words were genuine. There wasn't a trace of falsehood in his firm voice and steady gaze. She wondered how, unlike herself, he could remain so composed and upright after everything that had transpired. Later, Sylvia's parents, Earl and Countess Flor, came to visit. The Countess, overcome with emotion, rushed to her daughter, anxiously inquiring about her well-being. She mentioned the attack at the banquet and the recent treason, uttering the last word in a hushed tone, as if it were something unspeakable. She confessed that she nearly fainted when she heard Sylvia had been present during the incident. Sobbing, she inquired about Sylvia's back, explaining they had wanted to visit sooner, but were told the barrier was still unstable. Sylvia calmly reassured her mother that she was fine and asked her to compose herself, reminding her of their long journey. However, the Countess couldn't contain her distress exclaiming how they could possibly remain calm when their child had been hurt. Sylvia forced a smile, but inwardly sighed, feeling irritated. She thought to herself that she'd rather just lie in bed and wish for it all to be over. Then, the Earl addressed her kindly, stating they had been considering something. When Sylvia asked what it was, he hesitated before suggesting she return to Floret. Sylvia was taken aback, questioning his words, repeating the idea of returning to Floret in disbelief. Lowering his voice, her father explained that the north seemed too dangerous for her. He assured her they would do everything in their power to make it happen if she wished to leave. Then, he gently asked her what she thought about it. Meanwhile, outside the room, Randall stood anxiously, eavesdropping on the conversation. The thought of Sylvia returning to Floret filled him with unease. He recalled how she had refused a suggestion last time, but this time, with her parents making the request, things might be different. A sense of foreboding washed over him as he wondered what her inner response would be. Sylvia found the situation troublesome. After all, she had gone to great lengths to convince Randall to let her stay. Now, her parents were trying to persuade her to leave. She understood their concern. But still, with a bright smile, she assured them that while she appreciated their worry, she loved her husband too much to ever consider leaving him. She firmly stated she would stay. Hearing this, Randall felt an immense wave of relief wash over him, but in his distraction, he lost his balance and tumbled to the floor. Sylvia and her parents turned to him in surprise. Sylvia called his name with a hint of amusement, while Randall, flustered and love-struck, struggled to form a coherent response. He hesitated, then nervously asked Sylvia what she had just said. Sylvia's heart skipped a beat at the sudden shift in his tone, and she asked if he was all right, noting that he must have hurt his knee when he fell. Randall quickly brushed it off, stammering awkwardly that he was fine. To cover his embarrassment, he claimed he had come to bring her some cookies, then amended his statement, saying dinner must be ready. He then suggested they go and eat. Sylvia glanced at the time and agreed. As they left, Randall tried to compose himself, reminding himself to stay calm. He convinced himself that Sylvia didn't truly like him. All she wanted was his body. At dinner, Randall politely greeted the Earl and Countess, apologizing for the earlier scene. He expressed his hope that they would enjoy the meal, though he wasn't sure if it would be to their liking. Meanwhile, Sylvia glanced at her plate, a sense of unease settling upon her as she thought to herself, why did she always, without hesitation, reach for the least appetizing health food? She pushed her portion towards Randall. Noticing this, Randall maintained his composure and with a playful tone expressed his hope that Sylvia would enjoy her meal. As usual, the Countess was deeply touched by the sight of them sharing this moment, scarcely able to believe her eyes. She recalled how Sylvia used to refuse to eat anything at all. Yet now, here she was dining pleasantly with her husband. Perhaps she thought excitedly soulmates truly did exist. Then, with hopeful curiosity, she hesitantly inquired if there was any news about children. Sylvia froze, shocked, while Randall broke out in a nervous sweat. The Countess looked on expectantly, while the Earl's expression darkened. Randall struggled to find the right words, hesitantly replying that they believed it would happen in due time, and reassured them not to worry too much. The atmosphere grew awkward. As the meal continued, Randall found himself lost in thought. He wondered if Sylvia had insisted on consummating their marriage because she desired children. However, he felt she needn't put so much pressure on herself. He resolved to tell her, once they were back in their room, that she shouldn't feel burdened by the expectation of producing an heir. Later, in their room, Randall casually asked Sylvia if her parents were enjoying their stay. Sylvia replied that they were, though it had taken considerable effort to convince them that she was too old to share a bed with them. Randall chuckled, saying that such behavior was typical of the Florets. As they prepared for bed, Sylvia suggested they lie down, but Randall hesitated, mentioning he had something to tell her. When Sylvia asked what it was, he cleared his throat, tried to formulate his words. He carefully broached the topic of their marriage, explaining that if she had insisted on its consummation due to the pressure of producing an heir, she shouldn't feel obligated. At the mention of children, Sylvia's expression unexpectedly changed. To Randall's astonishment, she reacted loudly, declaring that she couldn't have children. Randall was taken aback, unable to comprehend her sudden outburst. However, Sylvia quickly corrected herself, claiming she misspoke. She then thanked him for his consideration and abruptly ended the conversation, saying she was going to sleep. As they lay in bed, Randall couldn't shake the growing unease in his heart. Sylvia's words echoed in his mind, her claim that she couldn't have children. He silently wondered what she was truly thinking. In Sylvia's previous life, she recalled an encounter. A man frantically tried to wake her, warning that she would die if she remained in the demon's lair. Confused and disoriented, Sylvia, barely registering his concern, snapped at him to leave her alone. In her frustration, she even slapped him, leading him to complain that the blow was unnecessary. She then ominously warned him that if he saved her again, she would kill him next time. As Xenia, her second reincarnation, Sylvia seethed with rage at her inability to die as she pleased. Granted a second life, she desperately sought death, repeatedly venturing into demon-infested territories. However, there was a man who persistently interfered with her plans. Every time she attempted to enter danger, he would block her path, even grabbing her legs to prevent her from proceeding. Frustrated, she stepped on his face, yet he continued to intervene. Despite her repeated warnings to leave her alone, she surprisingly ended up marrying him. On their wedding day, she questioned his motives, sarcastically suggesting that his constant efforts to save her had been his way of courting her. The man blushed awkwardly, retorting that he hadn't planned on falling in love with her. Xenia glared at him furiously. He swallowed nervously, then confessed. He still didn't understand why she wanted to die, but if she was going to live, he hoped she would choose to spend the rest of her life with him. After their marriage, Xenia and her husband lived a happy life, even having a daughter. One day, their little girl sat perched on her father's shoulders, waving excitedly at her mother. She called out to Xenia, excitedly recounting her day, explaining how much fun she'd had playing with her father and how they had picked some big mushrooms. Xenia joyfully pulled her daughter into a hug, asking how her day had been with her father. The girl eagerly replied that it had been wonderful, but then innocently revealed that her father had slipped and tumbled down a slope. Xenia's husband, embarrassed, quickly tried to shush their daughter, reminding her that it was supposed to be their little secret. However, the little girl giggled, saying it was too funny to keep to herself. Watching them, Xenia couldn't help but laugh as well. In that moment, she realized she was truly happy. Perhaps, she thought, continuing to live like this wasn't so bad after all. But that happiness was fleeting. One tragic day, flames engulfed their home, trapping her husband and daughter inside. Xenia could only weep helplessly, watching as the fire consumed everything she loved. The life she had built, the happiness she had found, all turned to ash in an instant. Reeling in grief, she reflected, realizing that all she had ever wanted was to raise her daughter and live a happy life with her family. That was why she had worked as a mercenary mage. She had never imagined that the mercenaries who had lost their jobs because of her would retaliate in such a cruel way, destroying her home and taking away everything she held dear. Sylvia strolled through the market with Cedric. He suddenly asked if she was all right. She seemed to snap out of a reverie, responding with a confused murmur. Cedric pointed out that she had rushed straight to the town square after seeing her parents off, which was unusual as she typically went straight back to sleep. He asked with concern if everything was okay. Sylvia explained that the debutante ball was coming up and she wanted to look around for anything she might need, though in reality, she was trying to avoid facing Randall. Then she suggested that Cedric call her by a different name while they were out, because she didn't want people to make a fuss knowing she was the Duchess. Cedric hesitated at first, saying he could never do such a thing, but Sylvia insisted. He reluctantly agreed, thinking to himself how peculiar she was. Sylvia thanked him. Suddenly, a figure darted past them, catching Sylvia's attention. She asked what that was. Cedric, unsure, advised her to stay behind him just in case. Realizing his mistake, he quickly corrected himself, addressing her as Gracie. Sylvia smiled approvingly, commending him. Just then, someone shouted that the fleeing man was a pickpocket. Cedric understood what was happening and cautioned Sylvia to be careful as well. Meanwhile, Sylvia, considering using this situation to alleviate her gloomy mood, called out to Cedric, who immediately responded. Sylvia flashed Cedric a charming smile and playfully commanded him to go catch the pickpocket. Cedric was taken aback by the request, but hesitated when Sylvia reminded him of his duty to help the villagers. She subtly pressured him, questioning if he truly couldn't handle even something this small. Cedric grumbled reluctantly, eventually giving in, assuring her he'd be back shortly and instructing her to stay near the guards. Sylvia reassured him not to worry, then slipped away to a more secluded area. Alone, she summoned her shadow magic and politely requested it to guide her to where the pickpocket had gone. However, before she could act, a shout came from behind, announcing that the thief had been caught. Sylvia was surprised the situation had resolved itself before she could intervene, and she peeked curiously at the scene. To her astonishment, the pickpocket turned out to be a young girl, fiercely biting a man's leg. Amused and bewildered, Sylvia observed the unusual scene, hesitant to interfere. Deciding to help, she subtly cast a spell on the man, causing him to collapse unconscious. The pickpocket girl stared in disbelief at the fallen man. She wondered how he could have fainted from just a bite, briefly considering that her bite might be far more potent than she realized. The thought thrilled her, and she pondered whether she could refine it into a fighting technique. Just then, Sylvia approached the girl, gently asking if she was all right. Initially wary, the girl turned to Sylvia, immediately captivated by her beauty. She enthusiastically asked Sylvia if she was an angel. Watching the girl's behavior, Sylvia was reminded of a creature she was familiar with from her past lives. Oh, a puppy. She playfully asked if she could pet her. At that moment, Cedric arrived, calling out a warning. He greeted Sylvia hurriedly, almost slipping up before correcting himself and calling her Gracie. He asked what she was doing there. Sylvia's mind raced, and she lied, claiming to be lost. Cedric, skeptical, pointed out that the guards were always within sight. Unfazed, she brought up her terrible sense of direction, mentioning how difficult it had been in the forest. Cedric sighed in exasperation, stating that if her sense of direction were truly that bad, she wouldn't have survived in this world. Sylvia noticed the girl recognizing Cedric and curiously asked if they knew each other. Cedric, seemingly recognizing her as well, formally introduced her as Lady Philia, daughter of Marquee Sacron. Sylvia was surprised by her identity, realizing she was more than just an energetic, puppy-like girl. Philia, on the other hand, was puzzled by Cedric addressing Sylvia as Gracie and questioned it. Sylvia casually explained it was just an alias. Upon hearing this, Philia immediately recognized her true identity, addressing her as the Duchess Belelffort and curtsying in a formal introduction. Then she revealed she had been betrothed to the Duke Belelffort as a child. The scene shifted to the manor. There, Philia and Randall were reunited. Overjoyed, Philia embraced Randall tightly, exclaiming how long it had been. Randall, caught off guard, appeared flustered, blurting out a question about what was going on. Philia playfully warned him to shut up and smile or face the consequences. Watching their interaction, a pang of jealousy struck Sylvia. She reflected on how she had brought Philia back, unable to refuse her insistence that she and Randall were merely childhood friends. Observing their closeness, Sylvia couldn't ignore the uncomfortable feeling rising within her. Randall suddenly turned to Sylvia, a warm smile gracing his face, expressing concern about the weather, urging her to come inside lest she catch a cold. He then instructed Wilcott to show Philia to her room, while simultaneously leading Sylvia away. Despite the affection in Randall's tone, Sylvia couldn't shake the unease she felt. Later that night, Philia slipped out of her room. She muttered to herself, thinking she should have left earlier, but had been busy dealing with endless chatter. Resolute, she reassured herself that she only needed to get a little closer to her goal. However, before she could proceed, someone suddenly grabbed her from behind, freezing her in momentary terror. To her relief, it was Cedric. He hushed her, sternly questioning what she was doing outside so late.